There's no margin anymore when you have a collection issue. We're not talking about margin. We're not talking about profitability. We're talking about cash, period. We're talking about if you're going to see a dime or a penny or nothing.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields. With me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we got a very special guest, Brett Gelfand, founder of CannaBIZ Collects. Brett, thanks for taking time. How are you doing today?
Of course, Brian. Doing awesome. How about you guys?
Excited to have you here. Kellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Really excited to talk to Brett. Really excited to dive into one of the industry's sore thumbs right now. How are you, Brian?
Yeah, I think that is a fair way to describe it. I think it's like a rite of passage, an unfortunate rite of passage, that if you're in the cannabis industry, you've likely faced the situation where you haven't been able to collect for a service you provided, and it's not like it is so easily to achieve that success. So having an opportunity to speak with Brett and kind of understand the nuances, where the opportunities are, where the solutions are, it could make a big difference for a lot of people who unfortunately have those situations. But before we get into the fun stuff, we have a East Coast, West Coast battle. And before we talk about loyalty, it's important to know where your heart currently lies and where you currently reside. So if you had to choose a coast, East Coast or West Coast, which one are you choosing?
I got to go East Coast. And the reason is I just moved down here to St. Pete, Florida. And my friends were like, wait, you're moving where? And I love it. So I'm originally from Atlanta, so already East Coast. And now I'm stable here in St. Pete, kind of set up my roots after years of traveling and being in Colorado and seeing both sides. But yes, to directly answer your question, I'm East Coast loyal at the moment. Yeah.
I love it. Let the record reflect, Count. So Brett, for our listeners unfamiliar with you, can you give a quick background on how you found your way to the cannabis space?
Yeah, like I mentioned, born and bred in Atlanta, Georgia. So as we know, Georgia is not the most friendly cannabis state in the world. But after college, after graduating from University of Georgia with a finance degree, I got an opportunity to move out to Colorado right outside of Aspen. And I essentially was hired to help build a cannabis company from the ground up. Long story short, I was promoted to CEO at a really young age. I was about 24 years old, running about a team of 60, 70 people, raised $20 million and learned the ins and outs of cannabis without having any idea what I was doing in business and no idea what I was doing in cannabis. So trial by fire. And that's when I learned the huge fire of collections and just the absolute epidemic that was coming. That was back in 2015 and led me to say, I got to find a better way to protect these companies and help collect money in this space through, what I'm doing now, running a collection agency.
So let's dive into that. When the idea first persisted, was it that you had a situation, unfortunate event unfolded, and that led you to believe, hey, like what can I do to achieve this? And you recognize that there was no solution?
Pretty much. My boss, who was the CEO at the time, he got sick, and that's what led to this promotion of me kind of having, running this organization. And I had so much to do and so many people to manage that every day I'd wake up and be very excited about pushing initiatives forward, building products, building brands. And one of the main initiatives that we started with, because we were in the mountains, like I said, close to Aspen, to try to compete with Denver, Boulder grows, we thought, what a great idea. Let's extend the first credit policy in cannabis. I mean, we were one of the first ones to do it in Colorado, to actually extend net 30-day terms, net 15-day terms, especially because delivery is really challenging in Colorado. There wasn't distribution. So we ended up extending these credit terms, which was an insane initiative in a good way. Like sales went through the roof. The board was patting me on the back. The next thing you know, 60, 90 days later, we had this massive AR list. And I couldn't get anything done because I realized everything mattered with cash flow. I mean, the only thing that actually mattered was making sure that I could get this cash collected so I could pay this massive overhead I had and keep reinvesting in the business. So the stars aligned because I was just so tired of waking up every day being a debt collector that my father actually was a commercial collection attorney for 30 years. And I said, Dad, you got to get in business with me. We got to start the first, cannabis collection agency and help mitigate this massive issue that's only getting worse.
So let's stay with that. The terms that you gave out, those are standard, right? Across most industries, most companies utilize those terms. And that's probably the intention behind that was like, hey, like, we're just going to operate like normal businesses. And then was it just challenges from those customers saying like, hey, we're not going to pay. We don't have the cash. Did they ever give you a reason, or was just one that just like they went ghost on you?
Yeah, there's a couple main ones. And now that I've been doing this for a while, they kind of stayed the same. Like one is banking, right? Like the fact that we were doing cash pickups and then maybe the manager was there saying, oh, well, look, the cash not available. I have to wait for the owner to come in and, give me the cash. Like that was an issue. Another issue is the fact that, not only the virtual payments is a problem, but you have people that have never really run a legitimate business that are now running legitimate dispensaries and retailers that might not be the most savvy to inventory planning, cash flow planning, accounts payable in general, accounting and bookkeeping. So that was a nightmare. And the last one that's becoming more prevalent as the industry advances, now that some of those things are advanced, there's been a lot of maturity, as we know, in the last few years, is just a lot of these companies don't know or don't have a credit and collection policy, but they're extending terms because that's become normal. Just like maybe on the street, you're fronting product. Like, yeah, that's very different now when there is legal recourse to extend terms. You're essentially giving a free loan, and people are doing this without doing any underwriting, without having formal contracts. And when you extend terms, you're acting like a bank. But these cannabis companies, many of them haven't really realized that until they're getting absolutely kind of hammered with past due money. Now they're starting to wake up to say, what can we do about this?
So the right time is to kind of get in contact with someone like you before they even consider extending terms or something like that. Is that kind of the approach then?
So yeah, there's kind of two sides of this. Is one, if you are going to extend terms, you need to have a credit policy and you need to have a collection policy. And CannaBIZ Collects, the nation's leading cannabis collection agency, is, the cannabis industry's probably preferred partner when it comes to escalation to collections and legal. So if you can't collect money internally, then you need to escalate that. However, there's a lot of steps to get there. You need to have your own internal accounts receivable manager. You need to know what kind of emails and touch points to be making once an account goes late before you even consider escalating to collections. But the clients that we represent that have a tight AR process, that are submitting accounts to collections quickly, are the ones that are getting paid back faster than the other companies that might be waiting 6, 7, 8 months without having any idea of what escalation even means. And the other prong outside of the collection side is the credit side. And that's the proactive approach. What is a credit policy? What does that even mean, right? How do you know who to do business with? What terms are you going to extend? What kind of credit limits are you going to provide? This isn't just like, hey, I got this. Because right now, the sales teams are basically controlling the sales process in cannabis, which is normal, right? These salespeople, especially now, every dollar counts. So people are doing whatever they can to get into doors. But there's a huge disconnect between sales and finance and accounting. So a lot of the sales managers and VPs of sales are making credit decisions saying, yeah, give this buyer net 30-day terms on a credit line of $20,000 because we need that order. We need to sell that. But there's a humongous disconnect because just getting product from your inventory onto a buyer's shelf does not mean that you're going to see cash one day. And that's what we're trying to solve by saying you need to know who you're doing business with, have proper agreements in place. So number one, you're working with people that are trustworthy and credible. And step two, if they do default, you have an escalation strategy in place where you have a chance of getting something back.
It's a ton to unpack, right? And I think the first part is like understanding these small businesses. How do they know, like, what is size of business, scale of a business, to know like what is worthwhile for them? If you're a company of 3, 5, 10 people, whose responsibility is that? How do you even start to put those pieces of the puzzle together?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. And it's something that internally, we spun off from CannaBIZ Collects, which has been the collection agency I've been building for the last 7 years. And we realized we need to have a proactive approach to help companies make decisions so they stay away and avoid this problem. Because as much as we love growing our collection business, we really are trying to make an impact to help this problem from occurring, because I know the pain. I've been there before. So we started as a sister company, the CCA, the Cannabis Credit Association, which entire intent is to help companies make credit decisions. And what we just launched is called the ultimate credit process, is like how to fit a template that's customizable into companies that are the size of 3 to a size of 100, right? What that means is there's basic checklist of things that you need to do no matter who you are. One being, if you're a small team and you don't have the resources that we didn't to have a full-time AR manager, full-time credit manager to make these decisions, then either your owner or your COO or your accountant, somebody on the finance, accounting, operational side needs to have a check and balance with the sales team. So if a sales person comes back and says, hey, I've got an order from this buyer at $10,000, there needs to be somebody responsible or a department responsible, if you're bigger, to say, okay, how are we going to approve or deny that decision? And right now, we've made it as easy on our platform where you can run a credit search and it shows low risk to high risk with recommendations on what you should do, because we know resources are limited. But just like any standard credit report right now that's used in every industry through Dun & Bradstreet, Experian, Equifax, even when you get a personal credit card, we're trying to do that and make it as simple as possible. So an owner or a accounting controller credit manager can look up a company and say, all right, these guys haven't paid in, over 90 days of $200,000 to 15 other companies. We probably shouldn't give them terms. Maybe we want to ease our way into it. But without having that information, what we hear all the time is, you know what? We think we know who the bad actors are, but like we need the sale. So like, let's just see what happens, because I'd rather get our product on the shelf because we need that relationship instead of, denying somebody or denying the opportunity or causing friction in the beginning of the sale, just in case they don't pay us. And I think the narrative is shifting because people are going out of business now because they're making those decisions too much.
That situation that you described is so perfectly articulated and such a terrible, terrible challenge of this industry, right? Like everyone is fighting to survive. They're like, hey, this is an opportunity for us. Yes, it's a little risky, but like we give them the product, then they sell it. Why would they not pay us? Because then they can get more product and do it again. And unfortunately, the cycle is so, so deadly because what ends up happening, exactly like you're saying, is that they don't get paid. Whose responsibility is to chase that down? Who's spending time doing that? Because there is nothing worse, and I can say firsthand, there is nothing worse than trying to chase down someone who hasn't paid you versus spending your time trying to grow the actual business, right? What had happened in the past, in your mind, you're like, I did that work. We did those elements. We helped them be successful. Now they should just pay us for what we achieved. And I can only imagine how many people are listening to this who are like, my God, like, I wish I would have made that decision differently. I wish I would have known CAA existed because then I would have had the opportunity to know ahead of time that this was a risky venture.
And it's fascinating for me myself because I never thought in a million years that I would be the owner of a collection agency. Like that's like one of the least sexy titles that you can say. And my dad always wanted me to take over his collection practice when I was younger. And I would just kind of like, all right, sure, Dad, like never in a million years. But really when I wake up today, and you guys have experienced it, I'm assuming a majority of your listeners have experienced it. Either if a friend owes you money or if a company owes you money, it is an awful feeling, especially if you're dealing with debtors that make you feel bad about chasing your own debt. There's even like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode with Larry David, who's like, how am I the bad guy chasing money that you owe me? Like they make you feel like the bad guy. And it's a ton of terrible energy. It happens to us. We have our own clients that we've collected money for, and we invoice for our fee from a success fee. And our own clients that we recovered lost money for don't pay us sometimes. And they make us feel bad for being too hard on our collection practice to collect their money. And it's like, where do you think you got that money from? How do you think you even recovered a dime? It's because of what we do for a living and we got you paid. And that energy, you can even feel it in me. It's frustrating. It's frustrating for everybody. So it's so important to separate emotion, which I can tell you firsthand, it's hard to do. Separate emotion from business and to have an SOP, a policy in place where you're going to do these things. And if you can't collect, you now have a partner to take on that headache. It's not just, the financial side or paying the contingency fee if you can collect it. Because mind you, there's no guarantee to collect after something's gone old. But it's also the energy and the time spent chasing someone that obviously isn't respecting your demand for payment. That can cripple a company, especially if you're small.
I mean, like it may not be like the sexiest business ever, right? But it's also like absolutely critical for an industry to function and move forward. And I think it's even more critical right now for like the cannabis industry, where you see this problem, I think, is a little more rampant than other industries just because of its nuance and maturity aspects, right? So like I look at like California, right? Like California has a really robust market, right? $3-4 billion, and a lot of product gets sold in the state of California. But talking to manufacturers, they're like, hey, like you were saying, they're like, we only are starting to do business with X and Y dispensary because they're the ones that kind of pay the bills. And like, in my mind, I think that one of the hardest things to determine is like, that's all hearsay. And they learned that because they're like, hey, we did business with company dispensary D and they just didn't pay us, so we don't do it anymore. There's no like database like you're describing where like you can just Google like, hey, how many times does this person pay? So like, how did you guys go about like aggregating that information? Like kind of talk about like that whole process of building the actual like portfolio of information from an understanding perspective that your team has right now.
Sure. And you make an awesome point because it's not like credit and leverage is not bad. And we know, being in the United States, that our country runs off of credit, and companies run off of credit. To be able to get debt and leverage your business is a good thing if you do it the right way. So when people in California and companies in California tell us now, we're just going COD because we can't afford to, have any more delinquencies, I get it. But if the whole industry goes that way, that they're just going to cut off the ability to extend terms, that's going to shrink our industry, right? Like, that's not a good thing. So to answer your question on how we built this up in order to solve that problem, we were very fortunate in the fact that by running CannaBIZ Collects for the last 7 or 8 years, we were the only ones that had data on who was being sent to collections real time. I mean, we're talking over $160 million of debt, 8,000 individual placements that our firm had alone. And I tried doing this back in probably 2018, a few years after I started the agency, to say, hey, let me try to resell credit reports from these other bureaus. There was no data because cannabis companies weren't reporting their accounts receivable data. That's how these bureaus work, right? You have to report your AR from accounting to the bureaus. And no one was doing that. No one had any idea that that even really happened outside of cannabis. So the way we did it is we were able to set up a private membership and provide access as like a pay-to-play model, because now we had something to give. If you were in a Dun & Bradstreet report, there's very little data, right? But now we could basically expand on all the claims across the country of who were sent to collections. And in exchange for signing up to see that information, you have to share your accounts receivable information anonymously. Everything's anonymous. So you have to share your list of buyers to us. And are they paying you within 30, 60, 90 day plus, right? Your AR report. And this started about 1.5 years ago. And now we've grown to having close to 250 members that are all reporting their data from names like Leafly and Jeter and, Pax and Connected. And these are all companies, from large companies to small mom and pops, because it's affordable for everyone to share their AR and have access to say, wouldn't you like to know not only who was sent to collections through CannaBIZ Collects, because that data alone is a gold mine, but wouldn't you like to know who's paying Leafly within 30, 60, 90 days? Wouldn't you like to know who's paying Pax? You won't know who they're paying, but you would have access to the payment behavior of those customers aggregated in a report. And for us, it's game changing, because not only is it providing visibility on who to do business with and to monitor your existing accounts receivable so you know when to escalate if needed to collections, but it's also finally providing the industry with guardrails, because we've had debtors, basically people that reported to the CCA, retailers, called our company phone line and say, hey, I wasn't granted credit terms because I heard I was on your platform as a high risk buyer. What can I do to improve my credit score, because I really need credit terms because I don't have the cash to pay some of my suppliers? And we said, well, we can help you with that. If you can pay off some of your debt, you better get back to your accounts payable list and start paying off debt, because the next month your credit report is going to look a lot better. So we're actually finally moving this industry and where we wanted it to go, where there's guardrails, transparency, reliability on, not only the vendors making good decisions, but now the buyers having some accountability.
I think that's super important, but I can also imagine that there's conversations they have where they say, hey, Brett, I shouldn't be a high risk. I paid all my stuff. So-and-so is making that up. So how do you find the true information in order to validate the information? Because at the same time, you are hurting that business, but if they're not rightfully in the wrong, it's a very delicate balance.
It is. And it's something that was obviously nerve-wracking to start, because the last thing we want to do is hurt companies that are doing the right thing. The fact is, right now, we're getting accounts receivable data directly from our members. So if it's showing that they owe them money in their accounting system, there's nothing that we're doing other than taking that information and aggregating it. We do have an appeals process, just like most bureaus and trade credit associations have. If someone doesn't agree with what we're publishing, there's an appeal process, and we can essentially ensure and validate if that money's owed or not. But after doing this for close to about, I would say, 12 to 14 months of this site being active, we've had probably less than 10 issues like that. And the nice thing is we were able to mediate them and get those things resolved, because now finally there's a closed-in network of people being able and willing to work out problems versus just running away from theirs.
Are there any nuances from state to state that get kind of cooked into these reports, right? I don't know if certain states have different reporting requirements for accounting or stuff like that.
Great question. We keep it standard across every state because there's a lot of multi-state operators that want to run reports across state to state, and they want those reports to be standard. But there's tons of nuances. And I mean, just on a high level, and what we're about to be rolling out is some really amazing macro data around, like which growers in which state are owed by, let's say, testing labs or retailers owing. So we have now category level information on a state by state level that we can start aggregating and pulling kind of macro data. So either MSOs, investors, banks can use that information, but also just so the industry knows who and why are the bad actors in the space and what can we do to fix it. That's really the angle that we're taking. But aside from California, like you mentioned earlier, which is obviously the beginning of the avalanche here, Colorado was really messy too. Michigan and Massachusetts have become terrible. I mean, awful. Michigan is becoming an epidemic of collection issues. And there are different, I would say, platforms that include sites like Facebook where people are just posting, oh, I'm owed money from so-and-so. And people are trying to find a solution to work together. The problem there is that information is only active like once, right, on a post, and it only lives there for a second. And there's also some red tape around antitrust laws that are federal laws around basically, competition and making sure that you word things the right way. If you were going to say, you can't say, for example, we can't do business with this customer because they owe me money. Like that could be a violation of an antitrust law. And mind you, I'm not an attorney, and you should definitely, disclaimer, go get legal advice. But that is something, as I've been building this association, that's very serious to us, that we've had to get a lot of counsel about, is how to make sure that we're not violating antitrust laws when people are trying to communicate around who to do business with and who not to do business with. And I also, I think it's evident that cannabis is a young industry and people are learning, but something to keep your eyes out about. And more importantly, know that there's a solution that's going to be much more effective than a social media platform on a Facebook group.
For a second. So like if I'm a business and I have a customer and he didn't pay me and my business is about to fail because I'm owed money and I'm really angry and there's no outlet, and I go on Facebook and I essentially call him out, it's like defamation, which then could also be more negative to my situation? Is that kind of the situation?
I would say
you're not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer.
He's asking for legal advice.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I would say, depending on the situation and depending on how you word things, you should be sensitive to how you're.
Shame.
Yeah. But that's the point too, is because, right, like, and I've seen people on LinkedIn using that as a tool for leverage. And I don't blame them. Like I've been there before. Yeah. Like we need to find some way to get someone to pay us. Now, if that doesn't work, or if you want to take that risk and post on social media and do some kind of shaming, do what you got to do. It's not my business, but it becomes my business where if they don't pay you, you submit it to us. Then our collection team handles it. And at the same time, that claim gets submitted to the CCA. So now it's reported as a flag of someone being sent to collections. Their credit score goes down, and any member that wants to pull a report on that company is now going to see it. Versus if that same company that might want to do business with that person happens to be on LinkedIn at that same day and sees that they were shamed, okay, it's very different now of having true credit reports and accountability, which is going to make a much bigger long-term impact. But I get the emotional response and the impact that you want to make. Again, I think most of the time, owners, CEOs, people that, probably have much better things to do are spending a lot of time, because it is emotional response to like shame and post and chase bad actors. That's when I think it's important to understand this is business, and you need to save your time and opportunity costs from doing more proactive and go after good money versus bad money.
Yeah, I think everyone always likes to rely on social media as like that feel-good emotional post, across platforms. It's like, we're just going to vomit it out for the universe. And so-and-so's mom from across the country is like, did you see that post that Kellen did about that thing? He's shaming that one person. That cannabis industry is wild. But I want to go back to what you said about Massachusetts and Michigan. Why those markets? Is there any trends that you're seeing that show market maturity, certain product categories, certain companies? Is there any sort of trends that show where problems lead to, so that companies in, let's say, New York, a little earlier on, can keep in mind before it hits their shelves?
It blows my mind, Brian, that we can't just, we say history repeats itself, but like we've had the blueprint for years now. So I can't give you a good answer, because I wake up every day saying, why is there an issue now in Massachusetts? Like, Why is there problems in Michigan? The biggest problems I do think stem from the general foundation of how this country has set up cannabis, where banking is an inevitable problem. I'm sure you guys hear it every time someone's on this podcast. Banking is massive. If people don't have access to banks and proper capital, then they're forced to extend terms between themselves. And that's a really important point, right? Because if you can't go get an easy line of credit like you could outside of cannabis, now you're forced to ask for terms. And that process is going to be done differently because now these cannabis companies are acting like a bank, like I mentioned earlier, without really having any idea how to do that in any recourse. So you're basically an unsecured creditor. And the next thing you know, as you see in these receivership cases, most of those unsecured creditors don't get paid and these companies go out of business and the unsecured creditors kind of get screwed over, right? So the important part is this foundation of the taxes in a lot of these in states, especially California, what's happening now, cripple the company's cash flow, market saturation. There's too many licenses. There's too much, weed out there. And that's just going to drive down prices. So people don't have the cash flow to pay back their vendors. So I always see it as there's two types of debtors. There's the debtors that have the motive to pay. They wish that they could pay, but they don't have the means to pay. They just made some, I'm not even going to say they made poor business decisions. They were just in a very difficult market and it worked out against them and they wish they could pay, but they can't. And even with those, even if they're great people, you still have to get in line to get paid first because they probably owe dozens of other vendors. And the only way to get paid is to get on that list, to make sure that you get a judgment, to make sure that you get in the legal proceeding so you have a chance to get something. So even if they're great people, but they don't have the means to pay, you have to recognize when they don't have the means to pay and make sure that you're in line there. The other one, which is the frustrating part, which I think is way less than 50%, right? I think it's a small majority, but they're out there and they're probably louder than others, are the ones that don't have the motive and might have the means, which means that they're just bad actors. They're basically, I call them thieves. Like they just purposely are stealing and taking advantage of vendors. And we deal with those people every day. And unfortunately, there's not much you can do when someone is just an asshole and doesn't want to pay you. And that's when you have to escalate it, get it off your plate and use a professional like us that knows how to handle those people.
That's when Kellen goes on Facebook and writes that long ass rant. So
let's delete it later.
Yeah, you're like, that was way. Just post the GIF of the shame, and just keep it moving. So let's talk about how that collection process works, right? Let's say they check CCA, they felt comfortable with the risks, they move forward. Now they're trying to collect. They've sent off invoices. They've sent multiple emails. How many days should they consider before reaching out? And then what does that process look like?
Totally. Every company is different because of what you can do. But I would say at least within 60 days from internal reach out. So you should have somebody on your team and it really should not be your sales team. Like after the first week, if someone goes past due, the biggest thing that I can say is your sales team should not become collectors. Number one, if they do end up paying, it could completely disrupt the relationship with the sales team. And number two, you're wasting your sales people's time for going after good opportunities when the chance of collection goes down every day that this customer doesn't pay you. So you should have a designated accountant, AR rep, collection rep, someone on your team that's handling collections. They should be making outreach at least weekly until it gets to about 60 days old. Then I recommend it escalating to someone higher up on your team, CFO, owner, depending on the size, that sends up maybe a couple emails. And then the last thing I always recommend before day 90 is a formal internal demand letter. Something that could pull something up on ChatGPT if you want, or we have templates that we could provide you, but something that's very clear saying you have until this day and time to pay us, or else you're forcing us to send this to collections. Make it very clear that they're basically putting you in a position you don't want to be in, and there's a clear trigger date and time that this is going to be escalated to a collection partner. Number one, that's going to make you look way more official, way more professional. And honestly speaking, you don't have time for it anymore after it goes 90 days. If they haven't paid you for 90 days and they're not communicating anything, they're not working out payment plans, settlements, nothing, then that's the point that we see typically it needs to be escalated to a collection partner before they might give you every excuse in the book, but if they're not going to actually give you a settlement agreement, payment agreement, or some sort of payment within 90 days, the chances of them not paying is very high without it escalating to collections.
So let's say they don't pay. Then we contact your team. How does that work? How involved are we? And then what's that process look like?
Yeah, it's pretty cut and dry. You would essentially submit a claim to our agency, which takes about 5 minutes, saying who owes you the money, what's the email, phone, any information you have, backup documentation so we can evidence and validate the debt. And then our team takes that for about, let's say 45 to 60 days. Sometimes it could take a day and sometimes it could take 90 days, but doing what they can to get communication. We have, as I mentioned before, a ton of data. So typically we know these same repeat offenders, like, we have them on speed dial, many of them. Sometimes we're managing 20, 30 cases against the same debtor. But essentially what we do is get in touch, figure out what their motive is to pay, if they have the means to pay, and sit back, give our client updates along the way. And either we're going to say, hey, debtor is proposing a payment arrangement or a settlement. Do you want to take it? Totally in the driver's seat if they want to take it or refuse it. And we try to obviously get that settled and worked out before we have to consider escalated options. But if there's no movement and no momentum on the file, the next step is asking the client if they want to escalate it to legal. And we have one of the only legal networks exclusive to cannabis across the country. So in every state that cannabis operates, we actually have associate counsel that we can litigate those claims with, also purely on a contingency only basis. So you don't have to go pay attorney's fees. We have a full-time legal manager whose job is to manage that entire legal network and make sure that our client is getting updates. It's a lot of work, especially for some of our bigger clients that have dozens and dozens of cases every month, to manage that case file load and make sure that money's coming in the door, that the attorneys are doing their job. That's what we do. So we can go all the way from an initial outreach from our internal collection team all the way through acquiring a judgment, which basically means that the court is stamping the fact that you're owed the money, and post-judgment activity through the legal process, which is garnishments, till taps, things like even having the sheriff walk into a store and take money from a register. Like those things can all happen through the court, the court process.
So does the customer have to pay you before you get started? Is it success fee? How does that work?
Yeah, no. And I would never recommend paying any money to anybody to collect on bad debt, because now you're throwing good money after bad again. We work purely on contingency only. And we did that because I understand how tight cash is, and there's no reason to charge or pay an attorney an hourly fee to send demand letters if you have no guarantee to get paid.
Right.
It's the
And
worst way.
if you're out already, right, to double down on the bad actor is even more. So let's continue on that scenario, because I think that's really helpful. Is like, we have a problem. We reach out to your team. We don't pay you at all. We engage in some sort of understanding that if you collect the money, there's a success fee. We should talk about that. Is it phone calls, emails, in-person visits? What happens if it's not as easy of a person to find?
Totally. And it's funny because people ask me all the time, what can you guys do differently than what we can do? Like, we can make a phone call. We can send a demand letter. Like, oh, I got, Bruno on my team that is great at collecting money. Like, what? Listen, you might have great collectors, and there's a lot of factors here. One is the time and opportunity cost that we're taking off of the plate. Two, it's just like salespeople, right? You could have a really good salesperson that's going to bring home the bacon, and we're a team of, I think overall, over 100 years of commercial collection experience. Every collector we have, including we have in-house attorneys that work for us, all they've done is collection work, right? So we just know how to negotiate and collect money, probably better than the average sales rep for a cannabis company, because it's different, but similar skill sets, but it's different. And there's this massive part of this is the psychology of debt collection, where when you're escalating a matter to a collection agency, it shows the customer that you're very serious about your debt, because they're dealing with tons of other vendors that, with their sales reps or their owners saying, all right, Brian, all right, man, I'll give you another week or two. I know you're trying. I know you're, so-and-so isn't feeling well at home. And there's all these excuses that people are going to buy into. And when you say, hey, you have up until this time of day to pay, or else I'm forcing this to go to my collection partner, that's when that potential, debtor is like, all right, I really got to get this settled up, because I don't want a lawsuit. I don't want to be reported to the CCA or any other credit bureaus. And it really just changes the psychology of, you're really serious now, because you're willing to give up, because they know you're willing to hire or retain an agency, which is giving up, our rates are around 25% of anything that we can collect. So they know that you're paying someone now to do that work. If they're successful, they know you're more serious than maybe your competitor that is trying to do it solo.
No, that's very, very clear. And you're right. The psychological difference between dealing with someone like myself, who's been a little more emotionally attached and understanding, and you, who's like, listen, there's no emotional feelings here, right? This is what I'm hired to do. This is what I do. you've been pushed against this. If not, there's going to be repercussions. So how long does that chase occur? Because I'd imagine some people are very good at dodging those emails and those phone calls, given the fact that they know they're not paying and they've got that issue. So let's say 30, 60 days, and then it becomes a legal issue.
Yeah, typically about 45 to 60 days is when we really want to take it on. If there's no response, or if we have had a prior experience, which is really the massive value add that we give, is like I said before, we've seen a lot of these same debtors over and over again. And there might be a dozen that's already in legal, and we already have an understanding of what their capacity is to pay or how they're dealing with things on the legal process. So if we get a claim, let's say from you tomorrow, and we're like, oh, the same debtor we're dealing with on 5 other legal cases, we need to get this to legal immediately. That's a huge value add, because now you're saving months of time, maybe submitting it to another agency or trying to work it yourself, when we're speeding up that clock. And after about 90 days of an account going past due, I mean, the collection rate drops like 5 to 10% month over month. So, I mean, I have some charts that I could show and send, but like, it's just every month you wait, it goes down, 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 down. And that's why actually, if someone was going to try to subscribe or engage with our firm, we charge a higher rate after the claim is over a year old, because our rate of collections, which we do everything basically for free until we're successful, our rate goes down as well because the claims are so old. So we're trying to incentivize the industry to escalate matters before they get 12 months old, because they become much more difficult to collect.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, right? Because the longer people wait, the harder it is to collect, and the harder people collect, the less likely they get that money, and the whole cycle is broken. So if hypothetically, same scenario, we have an issue, your team's helping us out, should we anticipate 80%, 60% of retaining that fee? Because I'm assuming there's probably some negotiation where they're like, hey, Brett, I don't got it all. If they do have some money, they're like, I need payments over plan. How does that work?
Yeah, it's so case dependent. So I can tell you, if you were a client of ours now and you had a settlement on the table, because of the conditions of cannabis, and I'd have to understand like where the debtor's at, if we have any other experience with that debtor, how he's paying other creditors. But right now, I would say the motto here is take the money and run. I mean, right now in cannabis, you take the money and run. Obviously, the better we do for our clients, the better we do for ourselves, because it's all aligned with our contingency fees. So we hope to get the best bet. But if it was up to me, if I was in our client's shoes right now and they have a settlement amount on the table, as long as it looks reasonable, because we know how this market has been kind of collapsing pretty quickly, it's less about what your margin is, because people say, well, you guys are going to take your contingency fee, which is going to come out of our margin. There's no margin anymore when you have a collection issue. We're not talking about margin. We're not talking about profitability. We're talking about cash, period. We're talking about if you're going to see a dime or a penny or nothing. So I think that's a big disconnect that we try to overcome, that when you send an account to collections, there's no guarantee to get paid. You know, this is the final step. You're basically writing the account off. And if you see any money at the end of the day, great. But oh no, my margin, no, that's long gone. If you were able to collect your money within 90 days, and maybe you were able to give them a discount to pay them early, which is a great incentive, is to maybe in your interest terms to say, like, if you pay this account within, 30 days, let's say you pay early 5 days within 30 days, you get a 5% discount, or there's all types of ways and to creatively incentivize a buyer to pay you earlier. If they don't pay you, let's stop talking about margin and start talking about if you're going to see any cash in your bank, because we know in cannabis right now, people are not paying their bills.
Is there anything that's like unique about cannabis from a collection space? I know that your team has experience in collections in all other industries, but is there anything that's like super unique about cannabis?
Well, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I would, to dial them into a couple, like the banking from more of a business side, banking compliance, those things that really do affect, like, having to schedule cash pickups is insane. So many times, like, people don't have a bank account, which is normal for us now, but outside of cannabis, that's just wild, right? But I would say the more exciting or interesting topics here is just the personalities we deal with. And I've asked my collectors this on a lot of our meetings, like, just for fun, share some stories you had today. And I asked them a lot, like, this was different than when you were working, previously outside of cannabis. And they were like night and day. I mean, we have people, I can't even, I don't even know, even this is probably a R-rated or PG-13 rated podcast. I can't even share some of the things that people say to our collectors on a daily basis. And it's because of this going from street to legal market, where you have some characters that some of them are pretty scary. I mean, honestly, people are pretty aggressive. They're not friendly at all for a lot of the time. And because the market has gotten so tough, whenever anyone's angry, mean, and I think this can resonate with like business or personal, but like all those emotions are coming out of fear, right? Like anyone that's feeling, angry or gonna just basically rip up one of our collectors just for sending a demand letter because they owe money to a client, that person is afraid of something. And now in cannabis more than ever, they're afraid of not having money to put on their plate for their kids. They're afraid that their business is going to go under. And like, as much as like I try my best to sympathize with that, I think we all need to level up and understand that we're all playing a game here, and that game is more serious for some than others. But if you're doing a transaction, you're legally liable for the debt, and you might be scared, you might be worried, but to come out with respect and say, "Hey, I know I owe this money. I'm going to do my best to help pay you." It's always going to lead to a better outcome than you just acting out and being extremely rude and saying very vulgar things, because you're going to get sued anyways. You're going to have more problems at the end of the day. And it's just kind of laughable. It's something that I've had to work on too, to kind of like, actually try to respect the situation of some of these people that act so nasty, because you must know that they're going, their life is just not in a good place. So yeah, a little bit more of a sentimental piece there, but I do think the things that we hear on a daily basis can be very aggressive, very rude, very scary. And that's just part of it being the characters that got into this industry, and another part, how tough this industry has become, leads to a lot of fear.
Because it is a cash industry, do you have any of these clients that maybe like pay spitefully, like they show up with like a bag full of pennies or something, and like, you know what I mean?
I mean, the biggest tactics we see there is just, and it happened to us in Colorado all the time. We'd plan a pickup. Hey, you're going to have $5,000 ready for us at the dispensary. We get there and they're like, "Oh, sorry, we got $2,000. Like, we don't have the other $3,000. You're going to have to come back next week." And we're talking like driving from Carbondale to Denver. It's like maybe like a 3.5 hour drive. That happens all the time. It's just another way to delay and extend cash flow where, yeah, it's a tough call, because a lot of these operators are like, I need the sale. I need the customer. I can't burn a bridge with my relationship. The buyers are doing their best to still act like the nice guy and make up excuses that they're not doing anything wrong. And the biggest question is, how do you manage those situations? Like, how do you maneuver being able to sell to a buyer that's acting nice but not paying you, but you really need that cash to grow and build your business? And it just comes back to having to have hard conversations and set expectations and not be afraid to say no to a customer. I think that's the biggest thing, and it's very challenging for everybody. It's how do you have the courage, or how can you gain that courage to say, you know what, I don't need this type of customer if this is the way that they're going to treat me, because I know that there's more customers out there, or the customers that I'm not interacting with that are good customers, I could give them more attention. I could try to upsell them. I could try to work with them to buy more, versus dealing with people that don't respect you. And I think that goes in and out of business, but it's a big thing in the collection world.
It's so hard to do. So can you give us just an estimate to the potential size of what the collection business is in the cannabis industry specifically? How large that number could potentially be?
So the best stat I can give you was, because we participated in a Whitney Economics white paper in it was about a year and a half ago. So in 2023, there was $3.8 billion in delinquent payments, is what we founded together there. And that's $3.8 billion. And then we took that information and we actually analyzed it through CCA. And I believe it was in 2023, more than 50% was over 60 days late. So anyone that was extended terms, majority of those payments were paid after 60 days, which means that your cash flow cycle is now, you're waiting 2 extra months to get paid on something that you thought you'd get paid on 2 months prior. So when you're thinking about maybe hiring a new sales rep, or hiring a new AR manager, or hiring or investing in a new machine, all that cash flow, you're now pushing out 2 months. Like, that's a huge hit to your bottom line. So yeah, I think that stat is a large number, and we're going to have more and more macro data that I'd love to share with you guys, and you guys can share it with your audience on, we do these like quarterly wrap ups around credit data and which states are the biggest problems and how much debt is out there. And we have all that information that we're going to be kind of distributing throughout the industry.
Yeah,
Cool.
It's a staggering number. I guess, silly question. Do you think it's going up or down?
It's actually not a silly question because the problem got so bad, there's been a lot of constriction around credit terms, like we talked about before. And Keelan, you mentioned like a lot of people are going COD only now, and that's happening, right? So a lot of people got kind of burned and like, all right, I'm not doing that again. So we're seeing less, I would say, volume of claims coming in from the legacy states. The newer states are still experiencing the same problems. They're not learning from what happened before, which is, I wish I could just take a megaphone and say, stop, like doing what everyone else did. And I'm screaming every day being like, get on our platform. And if you don't like our platform to run credit checks, at least tell me that you found something else to run credit checks. Because right now I haven't seen any other actual business or credit reporting tool that can actually do what we do. So just find a solution, because the goal is to make sure you know who you're doing business with, period. Like, I don't care what you're doing, just make sure you know who you're doing business with. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, it's been less volume, but I think people are getting better actually at the quality of the business coming through. We were getting claims from 3-4 years, like a past due amount from 4 years ago. People were submitting, over the last few years, like people were submitting 2-3-year-old debt because they didn't even know we existed or they didn't know what escalation meant. Now people are getting a little bit tighter, understanding, all right, there is recourse. We need to shorten the cycle. Time is everything. The time value of money is everything in cannabis today. So I think now we're getting maybe less volume, but the quality of the business is getting a little bit better because people have better structures of credit and collection practices in place. It's still at its infancy and we have a lot of work to do, but it's much better than I think it was when I started. Definitely was better when I was out in Colorado in 2015. Like I did exactly what I'm telling people not to do.
Yeah, I think that information is so important. And I think for many of them out there, like the time value aspect is everything, right? And those extra dollars can go a ton away in helping to grow the business, to keep the lights on. And time seems to be the most precious asset. So I guess Brett's last question would be, for our listeners, they want to get in touch, they need help with their debts, where can they find you?
Yeah, www.CannaBIZCollects.com. That's with the Z, CannaBIZ Collects. And then anyone that is looking for credit reports, running credit checks on companies, please visit www.CannabisCredit.com. That's CANNABIZ credit.com. That's the CCA. And you can always find me on LinkedIn by searching my name. And that's where I live a lot, because that's where a lot of these cannabis pros are at these days. So yeah, that's how you can find us.
Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome, Brian. Thank you, Keelan.